morning or good afternoon. I am very excited at the opportunity and possibility to present my book, Finding Faith in Foreign Policy, Religion and American Diplomacy in a Postsecular World. Before I start, I would like to thank the European Academy of Religion and the Alberigo Award 2019 edition, and for the special mention of excellence my book received. And just looking at the range of books and works that have been awarded in this year edition, from the more historical to the more theological, and in the case of my own book, political scientific book, International Relations is the field, but which draws extensively from sociology of religion and deals with more contemporary issues. It really demonstrates the intellectual breadth, I think, and the interdisciplinary nature of this very special academy we have now in Europe. So let me start, first of all, with an example, and especially an example of an event. Upon his quite incredible election, Donald Trump, in his first foreign trip abroad, he made it a point to visit, a very sort of symbolic point, to visit Saudi Arabia, Israel, and then Italy / Vatican City on his first trip. And this first trip was unique for a variety of reasons. First, because most presidents, the vast majority of presidents, generally first trip abroad is to the United States neighbors, either to the north, Canada, or to the south, Mexico. And so this already sort of broke with general norms. But even more impressively, this trip was presented as a sort of symbolic pilgrimage to the sites, the main sites of the three Abrahamic faiths. And in fact, the National Security Advisor at the time, General McMaster, very much framed the trip in these terms. And here's a quote: "This trip is truly historic," he said. "No president has ever visited the homelands and holy sites of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths all in one trip." And so here we have an image of Trump visiting Saudi Arabia. That was a sort of quite particular photo, but the point is that part of the trip was he delivered a speech on counterterrorism and fighting, especially the ideological fight against Islamism. And here's him opening a center dedicated to that in Riyadh. Then the visit to Jerusalem. And here's a photo with the Western Wall. And then his trip to the Vatican. And meeting Pope Francis. Now, this trip, although it was really unique in many respects, in others it wasn't. In fact, it very much fell in line with a wider post-Cold War trend in United States foreign policy to engage faiths and intervene in religious matters, and increasingly intervene in religious matters around the world. In fact, since the end of the Cold War, we've seen what many have referred to, and I also use this term in my book, we've seen the operationalization of religion in American foreign policy along a range of domains. One has been the institutionalization of the promotion of international religious freedom since 1998 with a congressional act, and an Office of International Religious Freedom was created in the State Department, and a U.S. independent commission as well was created, and they monitor, produce reports, provide a list of countries of particular concern, have started increasingly to develop programs designed with grants and so on, designed to promote religious freedom around the world. A second area has been around what I call faith-based development, faith-based aid, and especially around the issues of development and humanitarianism. These came into being, these policies, with the creation of White House Office on Faith-Based and Community Initiatives first, and then in the USAID agency responsible for aid, of another office there, with the arrival of George W. Bush, and in the context of his sort of compassionate conservative agenda. But these offices have continued thereafter, also during the Obama administration, and now during the Trump one as well. And they all sort of change and evolve across time, and I explore these in the book as well. Now, a fourth area where the operationalization of religion has taken place has been in what I call Muslim and Islamic interventions. A wide range of new special representatives, policies, offices focused on reforming Muslim society, politics, and even theologies have emerged. And here's a photo representing a very important, but highly symbolic moment. The first time a US president really addressed the whole of the Muslim world in a speech, which was Obama's famous speech in Cairo in 2009, A New Beginning. And a fourth area to emerge more recently, especially during the second term of the Obama administration, has generally been sort of referred to as religious engagement. Again, here a new office was opened in the State Department, titled Religion and Global Affairs, a special strategy, also trying to sort of coordinate the various moving parts on religious freedom, faith-based aid, and sort of countering violent extremism activities as well. And so this was a fourth area, though, that overlapped but also was distinct, headed by Sean Casey, for example, here represented in the photo at the time during the Obama administration. This was a fourth area to emerge, in which sort of approaching religion, intervening in religious affairs around the world became increasingly institutionalized within the structures and architecture of US foreign policy. Now, so what's going on here? So religion has become, unexpectedly in many ways, an increasingly organized and institutionalized subject and object of US foreign policy. I represent these different policy frameworks in terms of regimes. So 4 foreign policy regimes constituting a wider regime complex on religion and global affairs has emerged. I use the term regime because I want to capture not just the rise of a particular policy or an institution, but the whole bundle of policies, institutions designed to manage a particular issue. And these issues are all sort of connected to various aspects of religion. And I argue that their objective of the individual regime and the wider regime complex is to manage and marshal the power of faith to advance American interests and values globally. And here there's a table I have in the book as well, charting the emergence and continuation across administration of these 4 different religious foreign policy regimes on international religious freedom, faith-based aid, foreign aid, Muslim and Islamic interventions, and religious engagement. Now, the book is driven by 3 overarching questions. First, why has there been a growing focus across multiple different administrations, from the Clinton to the Bush Jr., Obama, and now Trump, on religion in US foreign policy? How have the boundaries between church and state, faith and foreign policy been redefined in the process of operationalizing religion? And what are the global effects of the growing entanglements between the sacred and the foreign policy of arguably the most powerful state in the international system today? So what I will do in the next part of my talk is to briefly touch upon how I answer these 3 overarching questions. First, in terms of the causes of these policies. Well, here the literature points to a variety of causes, and especially with the literature tends to focus on one or the other policies. And one of the unique things about this book is that it puts these different policies together and links them together. Does not just focus on religious freedom or countering violent extremist activities and counterterrorism activities, for example, or on aid. It sees them as part of a larger whole, this regime complex, whereby religion has become operationalized in US foreign policy. So the causes are complex. To some extent, many have argued, for example, an important has been the rise of the Christian right and the politicization of evangelicals. And this is very important as a cause, and especially in the context of the religious freedom and faith based initiatives. But the sort of religious lobbying type of cause is less apt at explaining, in particular, Islamic and Muslim interventions, and as well, to some extent, also religious engagement policies. Other explanations in the past may want to emphasize the role of individual presidents and their sort of faith and their religious beliefs. And here, often, much of the focus has been in the literature on the figure of George W. Bush, a born again president, very explicit and sort of very explicit about his faith in public. And the Bush, let's put it like that, explanation is an important one, but it does not really factor in policies that emerged before him, the religious freedom, which came into being in 1998 under the sort of Clinton presidency, and nor also the policies that came after Bush, in particular religious engagement. While clearly Bush was very important in his administration in the context of the faith-based aid and the Islamic intervention policies. A third set of explanations may emphasize the international system and in what is taking place outside of the United States, and in particular, the rise of political Islam and the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Again, this is a very important part of the story and the puzzle, but does not explain really the policies that emerged before 9/11, and in particular, religious freedom, which emerged in 1998, and faith-based initiatives, which, although sort of emerged in 2001, predated September 11. So in order to be able to capture these different influences, both domestic and international, I sort of argue that we need to think more broadly in terms of situating the United States in the context of wider historical macro changes. And I put these in terms of the emergence of a post-secular world society. And this post-secular world society, within it, has two types of trends and forces taking place. And much of this I draw on literature on post-secularism, and here, of course, the writings on Habermas, but also more sociologically informed writings, for example. Philip Gorski and others have worked in this space. One has been what is generally referred to as religious resurgence. So the growing politicization of religious actors, identities, and beliefs that has occurred. And here's some images, of course, again, bringing back the Christian right or evangelicals and political Islam, but also, for example, Hindu nationalism that has taken place around the world. And at the same time, though, that this has occurred, there's also been an attempt or an effort to revisit certain assumptions about the secularization of the modern world. And these fall under what I refer to, again, drawing from the post-secular literature, as the emergence of a post-secular consciousness, increasingly represented by, of course, Habermas's own intervention in the post-secular. Here's Peter Berger, The Desecularization of World, 1999 book. José Casanova was already revisiting some of the assumption of secularization theory in 1994 with his book Public Religions, and William Connolly, and so on and so forth, Why I'm Not a Secularist, Talal Assad, and many others were sort of rethinking secularization theory, Shmuel Eisenstadt, Multiple Modernities, and much of this thinking forms, I would argue, part of a wider sort of new way of thinking about modernity as not exclusively secular. Now, these two overarching forces, religious resurgence and post-secular consciousness, as they represent sort of the emergence of a post-secular world society, embedded within these forces are a range of actors. that I would argue have emerged in the context of domestic American context, pressuring the United States to adapt and change its foreign policy to respond to these wider forces. And I identify three categories of actors in particular, and I call them desecularizing actors. They are desecularizing because they tend to contest what they view as a secular or secularist approach in US foreign policy that does not recognize or value religion, and therefore is both an approach that is problematic both on normative terms and also on strategic grounds. Without understanding, say, Islam, we cannot really understand the appeal of Osama bin Laden, for instance, and so on. And there are three categories of desecularizing actors that come forward since the 1990s to very much contest what they view as the problematic secular nature of US foreign policies. These are activists, that sort of civil society, advocacy, lobby, religious organizations. And here there's a graph pointing out not just at the growth of the Christian right, which is very important in its related movements, but also of DC-based religious advocacy organizations over the year. And the secularizing activists are very much embedded within processes, I would argue, of religious resurgence. Then we would have also desecularizing experts, I'd argue. There's been a proliferation, much more embedded also, partly embedded in the process of religious resurgence, but also very much representative of this shift in thinking and the emergence of postsecular consciousness. There's been a mushrooming of initiatives in the US, as in many other parts of the world, but this is focused on the US, rethinking the role of faith in world politics. Pew started a Pew Forum on Religion after 9/11. The Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs was created in Georgetown in these decades. And many other centers emerged within Brookings Institute, within other think tanks like the Hudson Institute, within the Council on Foreign Relations, and initiatives on religion emerged within also universities, and then also more faith-based type of think tanks emerged, like the IGE, Institute for Global Engagement, led by disciples, basically. And so these constitute a world of experts that claim and put forward the case that religion matters more in world politics, and US foreign policy needs to adapt and change to this reality. Third category of actors are what I would argue are the secularizing policymakers. At a very crucial moment in the operationalization of religion, from George W. Bush, but President Obama himself, to even secretaries of state like John Kerry, and here's a major statement by him. If I went back to college today, I think I would probably major in comparative religion, because that's how integrated it is in everything that we are working on and deciding and thinking about today. And this statement came very much in the context of him opening the Religious and Global Affairs Office in the State Department in 2013, for example. So at various stages, various political leaders, Congress, members of Congress, secretaries of state have also had a very important role in authorizing and signing off and pushing for the creation of these various religious foreign policy regimes. Now, in terms of the shifting boundaries between the secular and the religious in US foreign policy, the book argues that there has been a shift, and it frames these in terms of desecularization, in fact, drawing especially here from the framework put forward by Karpov, which reinterprets the work of Peter Berger, for example. And I argue that processes of desecularization in the context of US foreign policy making and its institutions have taken place along four lines. I won't go into much detail here, but broadly speaking, in terms of institutional desecularization, we've seen the emergence of new offices that focus on religion and policies that target religious actors. These offices have been staffed with either religious activists, members from faith-based organizations, theologians, or individuals that have been chosen because of their particular religious identity or expertise. And in a sense, there's been a growing entanglement and less strict separation between state institutions and religion through these emergence of these policies. But by epistemic, ideological, and normative, I mean also a wider change in mentalities and in the culture of the foreign policy establishment, milieu, and bureaucracies. Now, the extent to which the whole bureaucracy has changed and thinks about religion constantly, that's not the case. But spaces have been opened in the context of these offices, in the context of speeches like also that by Kerry, for example, for thinking more seriously, more consistently about religion, for viewing religion and the mixing of religion and politics not just as a problematic issue, but also a force for good and one that the US should draw upon and mobilize to solve problems around the world. And in terms of normative desecularization, also there's been a revisiting of from away from a more strict understanding of church-state or religion-state separation type of norms to one that is more accommodationist. And I unpack much of this in the book. Now, in terms of global religious and secular effects, I argue that there are three major global religious secular effects of the institutionalization of religion in US foreign policy. First, that the US, either explicitly or implicitly, has, to greater or lesser extent, and there needs much more empirical work really on the ground to show some of these processes, has tended to shape through these policies global religious realities along American norms and interests. In particular, here I identify three main ways in which it has done so. It's what many would argue was previously a secular blind spot within the foreign policy architecture and bureaucracy, has been replaced by a sort of Christian soft spot. A lot of these initiatives, especially in the context of religious freedom and faith-based initiatives, have very much been influenced by Christian organizations, Christian intellectuals, and especially much of the benefits are generally intended, not explicitly, but implicitly. That's sort of the byproduct towards Christian organizations and faith-based actors and communities. Now, at the same time, though, as there's been a sort of a Christian soft spot, and I tease out the causes of this in the book quite carefully, the US has also tended to operate with a radically pluralist understanding of what constitutes religion, driven by its tradition of church-state separation and religious freedom, disestablishment and religious freedom, its strong individualistic and liberal, in the classical sense, culture and political thinking of American society, its understanding of religion, especially in the context of religious freedom activities, but also in terms of the context of religious engagement, has viewed all sorts of different types of organization as legitimate religious organizations or traditions and so on. Now, and this often is not the case in many states around the world. There's more traditional religions or more established religions, and others tend to be labeled as sects or cults or heresies and so on and so forth. In the context for us Europeans, I think one of the ways in which this really really manifests itself is that in the various U.S. foreign policy reports, religious freedom reports, Scientology, for example, is understood as a religion. Now, it's not to really enter the debates of whether it is or is not a religion, but in various parts of Europe, for example, in Germany, which is often attacked in these reports, Scientology is not viewed as a legitimate religion, but more also as a sort of business and so on. So there are these tensions between what Americans understand as religion, and around the world there are others, for example, in the context of Iran with Baha'is and other places with the Alevis and so on and so forth. But the US tends to operate with a very expansive understanding of religion. Third, when it supports religions around the world, it will tend to support what US foreign policymakers identify as true, good, or useful religion. And true and good religion often is a sort of, it's unclear whether it's conservative or progressive, it depends from administration, but a sort of more moderate, peaceful, non-violent, potentially sort of liberal form of religion that embraces capitalism and democracy. This is the sort of a kind of religion that US foreign policymakers generally have in mind. And when this kind of religion cannot be found, then it will sort of search for what I term useful religion. It could be even fundamentalist Islamist preachers that nonetheless are willing or are in a battle of ideas with more violent Islamists, for example. And here is part of the wider debate about moderate Muslims and supporting moderate Muslims and what exactly constitutes a moderate Muslim and so on. Now, quickly to move to the next two effects that I identify. A second effect I identify is that these policies tend to religionize world politics through two mechanisms of elevation and categorization. And basically, it means that these policies make religious identities, beliefs, even more salient. So they contribute to the global resurgence of religion around the world. And third, I argue that the operationalization of religion in U.S. foreign policy, it helps to promote the operationalization of religion in other contexts, especially in the context of Europe, for example. It's very important through two mechanisms, through diffusion and circulation of ideas. So as the US sets up its religious freedom ambassador at large and office in the State Department, and as it sets up its office on religious engagement, and as it sets up its office in the USAID focused on faith-based initiatives, these policies, others around the world learn, look, mimic, reproduce similar policies or feel legitimized in their efforts to propose these kind of policies. And actually also policymakers in the US working on these policies travel around the world, attend conferences, and hope to diffuse the sort of their policies in other parts of the world, from the UK to the European Union. And also here's an image in the context of CV activities now taking place also in Saudi Arabia. Now, three wider reflections before I end my talk, because I'm conscious I've been speaking roughly for 25 minutes now. So as a conclusion of the book, I sort of try to broaden the scope. And one of the ways in which that emerges is that each state that is sort of operationalizing religion will tend to engage, understand, support, and manage religion in their contextually specific ways. The way Americans understand what religion is, what religious freedom is very much influenced by a variety of domestic considerations, both political, its religious identity and traditions, and so on. One other area that has been much less explored, I think, in the literature so far is that there's been a lot of attention, either in favor or critiquing, or in my case, trying to chart the reasons why and the causes and consequences of the operationalization of religion in the foreign policy of states or international institutions like the EU. But there has been less attention to the other side, how religions have also geared themselves to be engaged or have themselves sought this kind of engagement from states to advance also their own religious interests. And third, and even more widely, in terms of a conclusion, I wonder whether we are in a new era of religious geopolitics, where a variety of states, as they seek to reform Islamic theologies, promote religious freedom in countries like China or so on around the world, as they engage with religious actors on the ground in the context of solving the Israel-Palestinian conflict, as they're basically intervening in religious matters around the world and mobilizing religion to solve problems around the world. Are we in a sort of new era of religious geopolitics? And if that is the case, is the Westphalian international system premised on the norm of non-intervention, especially non-intervention in domestic religious, in the domestic religious landscape of different countries, is it sort of over? So thank you very much for. Would it be better to be with everyone in Bologna and have the conference. But unfortunately, circumstances are what they are in the present time. And so, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present my work to the Alberigo Award and the EOARE, European Academy of Religion, and to all of you that have listened to this presentation. And here's just an image from the 9/11 memorial in New York. Thank you very much.